Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be tackling something I think we all struggle with from time to time,
hmm
overthinking. Are you ready to break free from that hamster wheel in your mind?
Oh, absolutely. I think we could all use a little less mental clutter.
Exactly, and we've got some really fascinating sources to help guide us today.
Oh, cool.
We've got personal stories, practical advice, even some scriptural wisdom,
Okay.
and we're going to try to figure out, what triggers this overthinking in the first place, why it can be so hard to shake,
Yeah.
and then most importantly,
Yeah.
we really want to give you some actual strategies to, find some peace of mind.
Awesome. Where do we even begin with all of that?
Well, one story really grabbed my attention.
Yeah.
Um, Someone who was convinced they had a brain tumor,
Oh, wow.
headaches, vision problems,
Yeah.
went to the doctor expecting the worst.
That's scary.
Yeah. Turns out it was just stress and migraines.
Oh, okay.
But the point is, overthinking can take a tiny worry
Yeah.
and just turn it into a monster. And it really makes you realize how powerful our thoughts can be.
That's a perfect example of how fear and uncertainty can really fuel that overthinking spiral. Our brains are meant to solve problems, but sometimes that instinct just goes haywire.
It's like hitting the gas pedal when you're already going 100 miles an hour.
Exactly.
And what's interesting is that some of the sources even describe this overthinking as a kind of spiritual battleground.
Oh, a battleground. What do you mean by that?
Well, they talk about how our thoughts can actually become this battleground where these negative voices are trying to drown out
Okay.
truth and reason.
Mm-hmm.
And we get caught in these cycles of doubt and fear.
Yeah, that's a really powerful image. Makes you think about what we're letting take up space in our minds.
Exactly. There's this one quote that really stuck with me. If you go looking for something to be wrong,
Ooh.
you'll eventually find it.
That's so true.
Right? It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We can actually create the problems that we're so afraid of.
It really highlights how our imaginations can work against us. If we're constantly focusing on the negative, we're going to find evidence to support those fears,
Right.
even if it's not really there.
But the good news is that our imaginations can also be a tool for positive change.
Okay.
We need to learn how to redirect them,
Yeah.
to tune into different voices.
So how do we actually start changing the channel, so to speak? What are these other voices we should be listening to?
Well, the sources suggest that one powerful voice we can tune into is the voice of Scripture.
So instead of getting lost in those anxious thoughts, we turn to something grounding.
Exactly. They talk about meditating on Scripture,
Yeah.
really letting those words sink in and replace the negativity.
Okay, it's like swapping out a distorted lens for one that brings things back into focus. But how does that actually work? I mean, just reading some verses doesn't magically make anxiety disappear, does it? Right. It's not about magic. It's about shifting our perspective. When we focus on God's promises, on his character, it starts to change how we see things. We begin to see things through a lens of hope instead of fear.
So it's like those verses become little anchors for our minds
Yeah.
when we're caught in a storm of what ifs.
Exactly. And the sources also offer a bunch of other really practical strategies for dealing with overthinking.
Okay, I'm all ears. What else did they suggest?
Well, one that really stood out to me was the idea of trusting God. It sounds simple, but they emphasize how powerful it can be to truly surrender those worries and anxieties.
Yeah, it makes sense. When we try to control every little thing, it's exhausting. It's like we're trying to carry a weight that's way too heavy for us.
Right, and the sources suggest that through prayer we can hand that weight over. It's like having a direct line to the source of peace, and it helps us to find clarity, direction, and comfort.
So it's not just about getting rid of the worries, it's about replacing them with something better, something stronger.
I think that's a great way to put it. And speaking of finding peace, another strategy they highlighted was living in the moment. It's easy to get caught up in the what-ifs of the future, but when we shift our focus to the present moment, we find more peace.
It reminds me of that saying, worrying is like paying interest on a debt you may never owe.
Exactly. It's wasted energy. The sources suggest we try practicing mindfulness.
So like focusing on our senses, what do we see here, feel right now? It's almost like a mini meditation.
That's one way to do it. They also talk about finding mindfulness through Christ, being present in the moment, aware of his presence with us.
So it's about connecting to something bigger than ourselves, something that brings us peace and stability.
Yes, I think that's the heart of it. And then there's the power of gratitude. They say focusing on what we're thankful for can be a powerful antidote to negativity.
It's like when you're wearing those rose-colored glasses. You start to see the world differently.
Exactly. Even when things are tough, there's always something to be grateful for, and that simple shift in focus can make a huge difference.
I love that. And then there's one more strategy that really resonates with me, and it's about embracing God's grace.
Oh, that's a good one. Tell me more about that.
Well, the sources talk about how understanding that God's grace is sufficient for us, that it covers all our mistakes and shortcomings, can help us let go of the guilt and shame that often fuels overthinking.
It's like a release valve for all that pressure we put on ourselves.
It is. And for me, that's incredibly freeing because sometimes overthinking stems from this idea that we have to be perfect, that we have to have it all figured out, but that's just not realistic.
And it's definitely not what God expects from us. He loves us unconditionally, flaws and all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Scripture prayer, trusting God, mindfulness, gratitude, and grace. That's a lot to take in.
It is. But I think it's important to remember that we don't have to do it all at once. The sources even say just pick one or two that resonate with you and start there.
That's good advice. It's about progress, not perfection. And if someone's really struggling, it's always okay to reach out for professional help. There are some great resources online like onlinetherapy.com that connect you with licensed therapists. There's no shame in seeking support when you need it.
It's a sign of strength, actually. It takes courage to admit you need help and to take steps to get better. So I'm curious, what are some of the strategies that stand out to you the most?
You know, I think the idea of replacing those anxious thoughts with scripture really resonates with me. It feels very actionable, something I can start doing right away. And I also love the focus on grace. It's a beautiful reminder that we don't have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. What about you?
I really like the idea of living in the moment. You know, it's so easy to get caught up in those what ifs, but focusing on the present can really bring a lot more peace.
It's amazing how much wisdom we can find in both personal stories and ancient texts.
Right. And the fact that people have been struggling with these same thoughts for centuries is oddly comforting.
Yeah, it really is. We're not alone in this. And speaking of wisdom, one thought from the source material really stuck with me.
Oh, okay.
And I think it kind of sums up this whole conversation perfectly.
I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Okay. It said, instead of anxiety being my go-to response, I want prayer and recalling scriptural promises to become my knee-jerk reaction whenever life turns pear-shaped.
Wow, that's powerful. It's like retraining our brains to react with faith instead of fear.
Exactly. It's not about eliminating anxiety altogether, but changing how we respond to it.
Okay.
Instead of letting it spiral out of control, we can choose to turn to something stronger.
So it's a choice. We're not just victims of our own overthinking.
Exactly. We have more power than we realize. We can choose to arm ourselves with these strategies we've been talking about.
Right.
Prayer, scripture, gratitude, grace.
I love that image of it being a knee-jerk reaction. It's like building a new habit, a new pathway in our brains.
It's not always easy, but with practice, we can create those new pathways and find ourselves naturally responding with more peace and less panic.
So to everyone listening out there, what will your knee-jerk reaction be the next time life throws you a curveball?
Will you choose to spiral down that rabbit hole of worry? Or will you reach for the tools that can help you find peace?
It's a journey, and it's not always easy, but it's a journey worth taking.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into overcoming overthinking. Remember, you have the power to choose peace. And don't forget, there's support available if you need it.
Until next time, keep diving.